Based on their attire and size, the more elaborate figure is presumed to be the tomb's occupant, while the simpler one appears to be a servant. So what exactly are these pottery figures which vividly reflect the everyday life of Shilla people? They are, in fact, hollow vessels, pitchers. Water could be poured in through a funnel at the horse's rear and dispensed through a spout at its chest. Then why would the Shilla people place such intricate vessels in a tomb of a young prince? Perhaps it was a heartfelt wish that the young prince whose life was cut short would never go thirsty on his long journey to the heavens.
In our headlines on this Tuesday, July 7th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung departs for Turkey earlier this morning to partake in this year's NATO Summit, where he plans to position South Korea as a pragmatic defense partner for the alliance. On the corporate front, Samsung Electronics sees an operating profit of over 89 trillion Korean won, or about $59 billion, up 1,810% on year. And news of record earnings by Samsung Electronics prompts massive profit-taking by investors, which in turn triggered an intraday circuit breaker before the KOSPI closed down some 5%. We start with the latest presidential diplomatic agenda as President Lee Jae-myung heads to Turkey for the NATO Summit starting Tuesday local time before flying into Mongolia for a state visit. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
Less than a month after attending the G7 summit, President Lee Jae-myung is heading to another major diplomatic stage, the NATO Summit in Turkey. Korea, participating as an invited partner, is eyeing to deepen defense cooperation with the alliance. Together, NATO's 32 members account for more than half of global defense spending, making it the world's largest defense market.
As geopolitical uncertainty continues to grow, NATO allies are increasing defense spending and expanding their own defense production capabilities. As a NATO partner, Korea also needs to strengthen interoperability in line with NATO standards, so our defense products can be more readily supplied to allied countries.
A key highlight of Lee's visit will be the NATO Summit Defense Industry Forum on Tuesday. The event will bring together senior NATO officials, government representatives, and defense industry leaders. There, President Lee will deliver a keynote address and join a panel discussion.
Through the forum, we will directly showcase the strengths of our defense industry and its rapid production capabilities to NATO allies and partner countries, while securing concrete avenues of cooperation as we work toward becoming one of the world's top 4 defense exporters.
Beyond defense, Seoul hopes to broaden cooperation with NATO in areas ranging from security to the economy. As part of that effort, President Lee will hold talks with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte on Tuesday. He will then join a meeting between NATO and its 4 Indo-Pacific partners, Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. Several bilateral meetings with fellow world leaders are also being arranged. After 2 days in Turkey, President Lee will travel to Mongolia for a 3-day state visit. He is scheduled to hold a summit with Mongolian President Ufnagin Huresu on Thursday. The trip will conclude with Lee attending the opening ceremony of Mongolia's historic Naram Festival as a guest of honor, becoming the first Korean president to do so. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, President Lee Jae-myung's presence at this year's NATO summit in Turkey comes against the backdrop of heightened security concerns, and pundits here believe South Korea can leverage its defense industry to forge a long-term, pragmatic partnership with like-minded nations. Our Cho Young-eun has more.
South Korea's attendance at the NATO summit comes as Europe undergoes one of its biggest defense buildups in decades. With NATO members increasing military spending and working to strengthen their defense industries, Korea sees the summit as a key opportunity to deepen security cooperation and promotes its defense exports.
By engaging directly with these countries, we expect to reinforce Korea's standing as a responsible global partner while identifying areas of practical cooperation that benefit all sides.
Korea has emerged as one of the world's leading arms exporters, ranking fourth globally with roughly 6% of the international arms export market, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Defense exports have become one of the country's fastest-growing industries since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with billion-dollar deals ranging from missile systems to naval vessels.
In this new era of geopolitical rivalry, Korea has established itself as one of the few defense exporters capable of providing cost competitiveness, rapid delivery, localization, and broader industrial cooperation. As security concerns grow in regions such as Eastern Europe and the Middle East, demand for Korean defense products continues to increase.
Experts say as Korea has become an increasingly attractive defense partner, future cooperation is expected to focus on joint development, maintenance, repair and overhaul, and supply chain partnerships.
The next step for Korea's defense industry is to move beyond simply exporting finished products. It should expand into joint development, local production, MRO, and supply chain partnerships with NATO members and partner countries. High-level dialogue between leaders and eventually formal agreements will be essential to making that happen.
Another expert says Korea must also adapt to Europe's changing defense strategy, adding that success in the industry ultimately depends on trust built through practical cooperation.
Defense exports are fundamentally built on trust between governments. They are not simply about selling better or cheaper weapons. Without mutual confidence and a clear understanding of each country's security needs and areas for cooperation, it is difficult to succeed in this market.
As security cooperation between Korea and NATO continues to expand, experts say this summit could become a turning point for Korea, expanding its long-term strategic partnership in Europe's evolving defense landscape. Cho Young-eun, Arirang News.
And top diplomats of South Korea, the US and Japan will sit down on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Turkey. According to the Foreign Ministry here, Minister Cho Hyun will hold talks with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi late Tuesday afternoon local time. On their agenda are issues related to the Korean Peninsula, as well as trilateral security and economic matters. The world's largest global warfare drill at sea is underway, and this year the South Korean Navy becomes the first Asian nation to take on a commanding role. Our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung files this report from Hawaii.
Naval forces from 30 nations convened around the Hawaiian Islands, advancing towards a shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. They came together for the Rim of the Pacific, the world's largest multinational maritime military training event. Marking its 30th edition this year, RIMPAC features 30 surface ships, 5 submarines, around 200 aircraft, and 30,000 personnel. On board the USS Essex of the U.S. Amphibious Fleet, one task force commander highlighted the importance of the drill, underlining that the region constitutes nearly 2/3 of the world's economy and is home to over half of the world's population.
And by integrating our forces, we ensure our collective ability to deter aggression, prevent coercion, and protect the global supply chains and lines of communications that help sustain our interconnected economies and our continued prosperity.
This year's RIMPAC exercise is all the more meaningful to the ROK Navy as Korea assumed the role of Combined Force Maritime Component Commander. Dubbed the Fortress on the Sea, the Navy's most advanced Aegis destroyer, the ROK's Cheongdo the Great, is making its RIMPAC debut as the South Korean Navy makes history as the first from Asia to command the exercise's Maritime Task Force. Taking part in simulated air defense warfare training, the crew in the warship's command and control center shot down incoming enemy missiles with SM-2 surface-to-air missiles. ROK's Cheongdo the Great is not the only core asset from Korea that's taking part in the drill. The ROK's Dosan Anchangho is docked at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii. The country's 3,000-ton submarine sailed across the Pacific before joining RIMPAC after completing a combined naval exercise with Canada in early June.
With some of our finest assets here, our multinational partners can see how far the ROK Navy has advanced. Serving as the Combined Force Maritime Component Commander, I can also see how much the Navy's global stature has grown.
With state-of-the-art assets in place, the ROK Navy will continue to demonstrate its capabilities as RIMPAC continues through July 31st. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Honolulu.
In other news now, Samsung Electronics has shattered market projections with its preliminary second quarter operating profit soaring over 1,800% on year. Our Park Chunan has the latest numbers.
Samsung Electronics has announced a record second quarter operating profit that goes beyond market expectations. According to a preliminary earnings report on Tuesday, the tech giant posted an operating profit of 89.4 trillion Korean won, or approximately $58.5 billion. To put this into perspective, the operating profit jumped an astonishing 1,810% from the same period last year. Revenue surged 129.3% year-over-year to reach 171 trillion won, or roughly $111.9 billion. In just that quarter, Samsung earned more than its combined operating profit for the 3 years spanning 2023 to 2025. No other global tech giant has ever reached this milestone in a single quarter, and the company's actual performance could have been even higher. The reported profit doesn't include around 17 trillion won, or approximately $11.1 billion allocated for employee performance bonuses. Without this provision, the second quarter operating profit would have surpassed the 100 trillion won mark. Samsung's massive earnings are being driven by an AI memory supercycle due to increased investment in AI infrastructure. The demand for advanced memory chips is heavily outstripping supply. As the company with the world's largest memory production capacity, Samsung is reaping the maximum benefits of this AI bottleneck. The firm's success is further solidified by its recent milestone of becoming the world's first to mass-produce and ship the 6th-generation HBM4 chips. Samsung said it plans to reinvest earnings into expanding its production bases in Korea. Industry watchers are taking a closer look at how the company's investments will translate into future profits and whether strong demand and pricing power for memory chips can be sustained. Park Junan, Arirang News.
And as the adage goes, buy the rumor, sell the news. That being said, news of remarkable earnings by Samsung Electronics prompted rampant profit-taking on the local bourse, pushing the benchmark KOSPI down. Our Kim Do-yeon covers Tuesday's trade.
The benchmark KOSPI on Tuesday closed down 4.91% at 7,656.31 points. The massive drop triggered an intraday circuit breaker, halting trading on the main bourse for 20 minutes in the afternoon. This followed a sidecar activation earlier in the morning. The collapse was driven by a sharp plunge in major semiconductor stocks. Samsung Electronics posted an earnings surprise early in the day with tentative revenue of 89.4 trillion won or $58.5 billion. However, the record figure sparked aggressive profit-taking, sending its shares down roughly 6.9% to close at 296,000 won. Rival SK Hynix also tumbled, closing down 6% at 2,201,000 won. Foreign investors drove the broader market rout, dumping a net 2.9 trillion won on Tuesday alone and extending their selling streak to 13 consecutive days. Over the past month, foreign investors have offloaded more than 42.3 trillion won from the KOSPI, or around $27.7 billion. Retail investors try to absorb the shock with a net purchase of 3.1 trillion won on the day, bringing their one-month total to more than 37.9 trillion won. Institutional investors also recorded a net sell-off of 309.7 billion won. With foreign investors continuing to sell off Korean shares and global chip makers also seeing stock declines, analysts say skepticism over the semiconductor sector is growing.
There are doubts about whether the strong earnings of semiconductor companies are sustainable. Furthermore, following the recent rapid rally, much of these expectations were already priced into the market.
At the same time, retail investors' ability to defend the index is showing signs of exhaustion. Korea Financial Investment Association data shows investor deposits have fallen sharply from roughly 137 trillion won in late June to 118 trillion won by July 3rd. Though local markets panicked, securities firms say it is too early to declare the end of the AI cycle. They point to upcoming U.S. big tech earnings at the end of July as the next critical variable. Meanwhile, the tech-heavy Kospi hit its lowest level of the year on Tuesday, closing at 831.23. 김도현, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, corporate Korea's cash flow statement for the first quarter of this year shows remarkable strength in net financial position, which refers to the value of its financial assets minus its financial liabilities. In fact, Korean companies saw their net cash hitting an all-time high of 20.8 trillion won, or over $13 billion, the highest quarterly sum since the Bank of Korea began collecting related data in 2009. Bank officials are linking the finding to stellar corporate earnings on the back of chip exports. And Hallyu-related exports soared almost 16% on year in 2025 to post nearly $19 billion. This is according to the Culture Ministry on this Tuesday, with officials adding that Hallyu-related exports have expanded at almost twice the pace of Korea's overall shipments overseas since 2015. By sector, music exports jumped over 80%, while tourism exports rose some 38% amid the success of Netflix's animation K-pop Demon Hunters. The Ukrainian capital city came under fresh Russian air assaults back on Monday that resulted in at least 22 losses of lives. Our Chung Hae-rim has the latest.
Russia launched a massive missile and drone attack on Ukraine on Monday, killing at least 22 people and injuring nearly 90 others. Ukrainian authorities said Russia fired 351 drones and 68 missiles early Monday, with Kyiv and nearby areas hit the hardest. Just hours earlier, U.S. President Donald Trump claimed a diplomatic resolution between the warring nations was close.
I think we're getting much closer than people realize, and President Putin wants it to end. I will tell you that very strongly.
Although Ukraine said it intercepted many of the drones and cruise missiles, all 29 ballistic missiles launched by Russia reportedly struck their targets, leaving emergency workers to search the rubble in residential areas for survivors. The strikes also exposed critical gaps in Ukraine's air defenses.
We do not have enough means of defense, especially Patriot missiles. We have demonstrated to all our partners both the need for and, most importantly, the ability to provide greater protection.
Zelensky added that Ukraine could produce Patriot systems itself if Washington granted the necessary manufacturing licenses. Meanwhile, Ukraine carried out its own long-range drone strikes on Russia, with military officials saying the Omsk oil refinery in western Siberia was hit. The facility is Russia's largest oil refinery and accounts for about 12% of the country's refining capacity. Analysts say repeated Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy sites have contributed to fuel shortages and rationing in several regions. Chung Hae-rim, Arirang News.
A pundit at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research believes dialogue regarding denuclearization on the Korean peninsula needs to begin with an acknowledgement of North Korea's nuclear arsenal. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young explains.
North Korea's expanding nuclear arsenal is forcing a more realistic approach to dialogue, with the opportunities of post-denuclearization talks increasingly out of reach. That's according to Dan Smith, non-resident senior fellow of the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, who is director of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute.
North Korea is an established nuclear power. It has some 60 or more nuclear warheads. It's got the capacity to construct more. It can put them onto missiles of varying ranges, and it's not out of the question that it develops intercontinental ballistic missile capability as well. So the opportunity of 25 years ago has gone, and we have to figure out how to handle the new and more dangerous world that has been created as a result.
His assessment comes as speculation continues over another summit between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Rather than seeking immediate denuclearization, Smith believes future negotiations should focus first on reducing military tensions and managing nuclear risks.
You have to start from the point of view that North Korea owns nuclear weapons. That's the reality. How do we manage that situation? How can we keep their nuclear weapons as at lower level as possible? And at the moment, North Korea shows no great urgency to rejoin negotiations on the question.
Smith offered a cautiously positive assessment of the Lee Jae-myung administration's phased approach, which seeks first to freeze, then reduce, and ultimately eliminate North Korea's nuclear program.
To freeze is realistic. To reduce is ambitious but realistic. I would, for the moment, not suggest to Pyongyang that I want to discuss them giving up their nuclear weapons, because I think that might destabilize or undermine the rest of the agenda. The patience and the idea of a process, that's very important, very wise, but I'm afraid denuclearization of North Korea in the way that we used to talk about it is simply off the table.
Smith says North Korea's closer military ties with Russia are also changing the regional equation.
DPRK is now more independent of China because it has managed to build a closer relationship with Russia. Russia has welcomed that closer relationship because it too is fearful, or at least anxious, about the increase in Chinese strength and power. China has been, I think, somewhat concerned about North Korea's more independent capacity, and is therefore reaching out to it much more diplomatically to try to reconstruct the friendship.
The shifting balance, Smith warns, could make North Korea harder to pressure as Pyongyang gains more diplomatic and military options between Moscow and Beijing. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
And on the social front, a growing number of fathers here in South Korea are actively seeking to share the burden of parenting, supported by family-friendly government policies. Our Shin So-eun has the story of one such father.
Walking towards the sink by the stacked dishes, Dad chooses to wear an apron instead of necktie and nice suit. He casually folds laundry between football highlights and sets the rice cooker, preparing daily chores. Now in Korea, a 31-year-old stay-at-home father like Jung Hee-sak is stepping into the role of primary caregiver.
The biggest reason was my wife's career. I realized how important her work was to her, and I didn't want childcare to become the reason she had to stop.
Right on the schedule, he arrives at daycare every afternoon to pick up his 4-year-old son. Instead of heading straight home, the short drive turns into a conversation, taking his son on a new small adventure. For years, this was deemed a mother's duty, but he has never questioned the value of bonding with his son.
There's what's often called the planning side of parenting. Since my husband engages in active, energetic play every day, our son's physical development has been remarkable compared with other children his age.
According to Statistics Korea, the number of stay-at-home fathers reached a record 274,000 in the first quarter, up 16.6% from a year earlier. At the same time, the number of women staying home for childcare and housework fell to 6.536 million, the lowest first quarter level on record. As caregiving roles continue to evolve, the government is expanding family-friendly policies, including more flexible parental leave and greater support for fathers taking time off. Jong also takes a leading role in Korean Papas, an Instagram-based community for fathers. By gathering regularly for activities like hiking and water-related events, hands-on fathers share parenting experiences.
Good parenting isn't about perfection. It's about giving your child your time and making them feel loved.
For families like Jong's, parenting isn't about dividing responsibility equally, but rather embracing the different strength each parent brings to raising a child. As Korea's birth rate shows early signs of recovery, father-led childcare is no longer the exception. The shift is redefining family life, moving beyond traditional gender roles. 신소은, Arirang News.
Today marks Choso, one of Korea's seasonal divisions that signals the start of the hottest part of summer. With the humidity climbing, it felt muggy even after just a few minutes of being outside. Scattered showers will pop up across inland areas through this evening as atmosphere remains unstable. Some of these showers could be sudden and quite intense, so make sure to have an umbrella with you. Starting tomorrow, the seasonal rain front will become active again and spread rain across the country. Between tomorrow and Thursday, Chungcheongnam-do and Jeollabuk-do provinces could see more than 200 millimeters of rain. Elsewhere across the central regions, some places could pick up over 150 millimeters of rain. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 25 degrees Celsius, so the city's first tropical night of the summer is possible. Chuncheon will start the day at 23 degrees, Gwangju at 24 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 27 degrees, while Daegu, Gyeongju, and Jeju will all top out at 32 degrees. Once the rain moves out, the steamy summer heat will build even more toward the end of the week. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.
어렸을 때부터 어머니가 미술학원을 운영을 하셨어요. 그래서 거기 가서 놀고 하다 보니까 자연스럽게 미술을 접하게 됐고, 저는 그리고 만드는 것 중에 만드는 게 더 재밌었어요. 그래서 이제 도요카 입학해서 다양한 재료들을 경험을 해봤지만 그 중에서도 물레성형 기법에 굉장히 매료가 됐고, 이 기법을 평생 하면서 하면 행복하겠다는 생각이 들어서 도자기를 계속 하게 되었습니다. 작업하시는 분들은 다들 공감을 하시겠지만 사실 정답이 없잖아요. 그래서 항상 불안하고 제가 제대로 된 길을 가고 있는지에 대한 이런 마음이 엄청 큰데, 프란치라는 좀 어떻게 보면 저한테는 되게 큰 상이었거든요. 제가 잘하고 있다고 도닥여주고 제대로 길을 가고 있다고 확신을 주는 것 같아서 저한테는 되게 의미 있는 지금까지 작업을 할 수 있는 원동력이기도 해요. 저는 옛날에 기 형태들을 많이 참고하는 편인 것 같고요. 엄청나게 섬세한 법들을 통해서 장식이 되어 있거든요. 저는 그런 장식들을 일부분씩 뜯어와서 그걸 제만의 방식대로 입체화시킵니다. 원래는 기라는 형태 자체가 실제로 사용하기 위해서 만들어졌잖아요. 그 공간을 저는 어떻게 하면 더 흥미롭게 보여줄 수 있을까? 그래서 제가 집중했던 부분이 창인데요. 건축에서도 창을 내부와 외부를 잇는 통로? 매개체라고 많이들 이야기를 하잖아요. 저는 그 부분에서 영감을 받아서 그 창의 의미를 형태에 접목시키게 되었습니다. 그래서 요즘에는 이제 설치 작업도 많이 하는 것 같아요. 보통은 컵 같은 경우는 최종 완성까지 한 3주에서 4주 정도 소요가 되고요. 큰 작업 같은 경우는 한 3달까지도 걸리는 작업들도 있는 것 같아요. 저 같은 경우는 창같이 복잡한 패턴들을 함께 구성을 하다 보니까 정말 많이 갈라져요. 그래서 재벌 가마에 들어가 있을 때가 가장 긴장되는 순간인 것 같습니다. 사실 공간이라는 것이 볼 수도 없고 만질 수도 없는 어떠한 모형의 어떤 것이잖아요. 그거를 이제 빛이나 그림자나 무형의 어떤 요소들을 활용해서 같이 공감할 수 있는 작업을 하고 싶습니다.
혈액형은 AB 또 AB형 날 들킬까봐 매일 나를 숨겼어 I'm sorry 어떤 사람이 되고 싶었던 걸까 그런 사람이 되면 행복해질까 내 목 살아 baby 밤에 살 것 같아도 매일 아침 널 볼 때 안아주고 싶다 정말 진심이야
Advances in AI technology have made the task of protecting personal information more critical. We tell you why. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Tuesday, July 7th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we touch upon efforts here to protect personal information as well as to deter juvenile crime. For more on this, I have Rui Valdez with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Rui, welcome back.
Glad to be here, Sonia.
I also have freelance journalist Rafael Rashid with us. Rafael, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Rui, we start with you. Let's begin with the status quo then regarding the leak of personal information here in South Korea as well as elsewhere.
Yes, well, starting with South Korea, well, it seems that it's facing what it looks like a structural privacy crisis with repeated mass data breaches that have caused almost 100 million records exposed only last year. This in platforms that are widely used by all citizens. It's almost one can bet that probably at least each citizen has got at least one kind of data breach. I mean, it's hard to tell exactly, but I would say an educated guess will tell you that. Starting, with some data from the Personal Information Protection Commission. They were mentioning that reports and consultations over personal data infringements rose about 25% last year, from roughly 40,800 cases in 2024 to nearly 51,000 in 2025. Then for the first quarter of this year, they already have almost 13,000. And the authorities are linking not only to major corporate breaches, but also AI-related abuses such as deepfakes and other forms of identity misuse. But still, going back to the corporate issues, there was a succession of massive leaks starting last year with SK Telecom. It was all over the media how it got exposed, how 23.2 million user records got exposed, and then that case was followed by the e-commerce giant Coupang, where his information was linked to about 37.5 million people, including names, phone numbers, and delivery addresses. There's also more recent cases in streaming platform TV, and including in government organizations like the ones that run the public bicycle services that affected around 4.6 million accounts. Why this keeps happening, of course, is the question everybody's making. Interestingly, investigators are not pointing out that this is like a very sophisticated scams. Many in their findings, many of their findings point out that sometimes there are just basic security failures from these institutions. So they are pushing them to improve the encryption of files, access controls, etc., etc. And while many experts are considering that also one of the problems is that these corporations treat cybersecurity as a cost instead of an investment. So that's why they could be a little bit lax or relaxed in a way about this issue. So just to finalize, well, the experts propose, of course, including zero trust security, which is an improvement that makes sure that the proper user is getting access to this information. And the debate also is going and ongoing beyond larger fines. Maybe later in the show we'll talk about the fines that these companies got for not having the appropriate security measures. But yeah, the experts point out that maybe that's not enough, so more should be done.
Right. Staying with what Maria just said, Rafael, authorities here in the country, they have pledged hefty penalties against companies that fail to protect the data of their customers. What are the numbers that we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think the case involving Coupang is probably the clearest illustration of where things are heading, and I think those numbers are quite telling. Just last month, the Personal Information Protection Commission that we just mentioned fined Coupang a record 624.7 billion won. That's roughly $410 million for the data breach that affected 33 million customers and an additional 4 million non-members. The company is said to have also collected and stored the online activity of around 11 million users across third-party websites and apps, and the regulator was explicit that this was not a kind of sophisticated hack. In the chairperson's own words, it occurred because of Coupang's lack of safety measures and systems. The fine itself is nearly twice Coupang's annual entire annual profit of $214 million, and this of course dwarfs the record fine that we saw with SK Telecom of $88 million approximately last year for its own breach. And if I could just maybe go to the side just a little bit, I think what makes this also significant is not just the cost in terms of the numbers, but also that this has spilt beyond the regulatory domain, but also had gone into diplomatic arena. Coupang and a number of US lawmakers, largely Republican, have accused the South Korean government of weaponizing the regulatory system and process against the American company. And Seoul has pushed back, of course, firmly, saying that this is due process and accusing Kupang of lobbying so aggressively in Washington that it has complicated talks between the two sides. Coming back to the numbers, I think the fines themselves, the numbers are going to get heavier under recent legal amendments that I believe are taking effect in September. The penalty will rise, at least the ceiling will rise from, I think it's 3% to a maximum of 10% of relevant revenues for serious repeat violations. So some analysts say, well, if we look at the Kupang case and had it happened after September, when the legal revisions will take place, then the fine could reach something like 1.4 trillion Korean won. So I think the message is to the large platform companies, or for that matter, any of these big tech companies or websites that we're using every day. I think the message is quite direct that, you know, if you have a single security failure, this could cost you a lot, if not an existential kind of financial threat.
Right. Meanwhile, we've also been told that the presence of AI chatbots, it's reportedly aggravating privacy risks. Could you explain this reality for us?
Yes, well, people increasingly are treating chatbots as personal assistants or second brains, as they call it, and they feed them as with medical, financial, and other types of information. This becomes a problem if you share the accounts. So Wall Street Journal did a nice piece on this, just saying what are the effects when you share an account, for example, in a chatbot, I don't know, in ChatGPT or other ones, and they interview some people, which kind of problems they were having. A little bit of concern, I was thinking, like, especially for the young people, that, well, these services are not cheap. So if you want a paid account with a, let's say, decent level of power in these platforms, what many students do is they share these accounts. But by doing that, and using them not only for academic purposes, but also for medical purposes or any other kind, financial too, well, maybe not even on purpose, but the colleague or whoever they're sharing this information with can spontaneously get informed about things of the other person's diseases or the other person's financial situation, family situation, psychological state, and that become a very delicate issue. Also, when you use these chatbots in this way, between two people, the chatbot can get confused. This means that since the chatbot thinks that you are the same person, sometimes, I don't know, that they were making some exercises in the article, or they were showing that if you ask for your resume, it would paste parts of the experience of both people. And then, of course, this can scale up into a bigger issue, no? On the other hand, there's another article by Nature that is quite a technical article, but in a nutshell, it's saying how vulnerable we are into getting data breach on our medical data. Even though you can be protected by your use, by the use or by your account with the privacy settings of your account, there's a thing called training data, the model's training data. So that, as we know, these chatbots get trained by the information they are fed to. So they are learning as you are interacting with them. So if somebody breaches those training data, they could kind of easily figure out if you have the disease. Why? Because they don't need to know the details of your particular case, but they could find out, this person belonged to a training, to the model training data that was for clinical data of cancer. And then they can figure out that you were a cancer patient. So they're just pointing out these kind of things. So the privacy leak is a little bit indirect. The AI does not explicitly say this person has cancer, but it may reveal the person belongs to data set who's defined the characteristics for having cancer in a better explained way. And also it points out that if you have rare conditions or you belong to minorities, you are also more vulnerable for data breachers to find out about your situation in different respects. The practical takeaway is, number one, try not to share accounts. In fact, the same companies strongly suggest when you get their services to not share the account with other people. Many, of course, can think, well, this is just like a profit-based statement, but after reading these articles, you can say, well, maybe it's actually they're trying in a way to protect your own information. And, well, the other one is to use temporary or incognito chat functions to reduce the exposure of this data.
Right then. Now, given these concerns, Rafael, the government here has also disclosed intentions to revamp the privacy protection system itself. Could you tell us a bit more about this ambitious initiative, and what can individuals like me do to better protect my personal information?
Sure, yeah. I mean, the government's own framing is that this represents a kind of fundamental shift, moving from a system centered on reacting to breaches essentially after they happen towards one around preventing them in the first place, with AI-specific protections at the center. So the Personal Information Protection Commission published its 2026 work plan under the vision of kind of building what it calls a trust-based AI convergence society. So they have a big budget for that, and that budget has increased since last year. But notably, a large share of the kind of money is going to be going into research and development rather than enforcement. There's going to be some budget allocated for the AI era data protection, including AI-based security protection technology, and also developing safer data utilization systems. Practically speaking, the Commission has introduced a pre-screening system for new AI services and products so that privacy risks are assessed at the planning stage, not after the risks actually happen, so we can assess the risks before the product is actually released onto the market when we're all using it and then exposed to these risks. There are also some new obligations around deepfake content. Companies will be required to delete synthetic content on a victim's request, and the government is also drafting dedicated legislation on surveillance cameras and also footage processing. I think on an individual level, probably the best thing is to hide in a cave and stop using the internet altogether. But I think practically speaking, the honest answer is that these institutional protections only go so far, and I think they're bound to happen. I keep on getting emails from companies apologizing for another breach. And to be honest, I can't really keep count how many are happening. But I think minimizing how much personal data you share with these platforms is probably the most effective step. Also checking whether these websites that you register with have had any breaches, and these are becoming more easier to detect. Even on the government's personal information portal, you can find out. And I guess probably using different passwords across different websites and not repeating them, and also enabling two-factor authentication. I think those are at least the minimum ways that we can stay protected.
Right, some valid points right there. Rui, speaking about the government's efforts to protect its public, there is talk about a plan to lower the age threshold for criminal liability. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, the South Korean government is considering lowering the age threshold for criminal responsibility from 14 years to 13, but only for juveniles that commit serious crimes. This is run by the Ministry of Gender Equality and the Ministry of Justice. They have been discussing this. It was supposed to be finalized, the decision, at the beginning of July, but I think because of the pushback and the discussion got a little bit complex, it's still in the evaluation. But basically, what they are proposing is that there are concerns that young people on the 13 years of age are committing crimes that are increasing, and these crimes include sexual offenses or some violent offenses considered well, they believe that maybe if they reduce this age to be, how to say, to get criminal responsibility, they would somehow reduce or prevent these crimes. At the same time, while these discussions were being held, a government-led public deliberation process recommended maintaining the current threshold, because there has been a lot of discussion that maybe we elaborate later that there's not necessarily a correlation between reducing the age for being criminally responsible for your actions to a reduction with crime. There's on the other side, the service do express that in general the citizens are kind of in favor of reducing the age. So you have two sides, maybe the general public, the experts that are, and the government officials that haven't been able to reach a consensus on this. Just to explain a little bit of the data where the government is basing these arguments, it says that the number of juveniles in this category apprehended by police rose from almost 12,000 in 2021 to around 21,000 last year. This is an increase of 80.7%. And among 263 juveniles in this age category admitted to reformatories between 2021 and last year, where there was a rise of Sorry, I'm going to rephrase it again. Among the 263 juveniles in this period, 83.3% were 13 years old. So this means they can go to reformatories, but they are not criminally punished. This is part of the current South Korean law, but some people believe that they should be treated as criminals or face criminal charges, of course, only when they commit serious crimes. Big question that probably we'll elaborate later is, what does serious crime mean? That part is, I think, the biggest part of the debate now.
Right. So, Rafael, as Julia just said, this initiative by the government has led to quite a bit of dispute. What are the thoughts, the concerns, that is, of the critics? And what can South Korea learn from its global partners with regard to this particular issue?
Yeah, I think the critics' main concerns, I mean, they're quite wide-ranging and come from a broad coalition, whether it's child welfare, academics, legal scholars, even National Human Rights Commission, and also NGOs in the space, also politicians. But I think the first concern is effectiveness. A social dialogue committee assembled by the government spent around 2 months looking into this, deliberations, and then they recommended in April keeping the current age threshold, concluding that there was insufficient evidence that lowering the age reduces juvenile crime. I think Denmark's experience is the most cited example. It lowered its age from 15 to 14 in 2010, saw the crime rates and reoffending among 14-year-olds rise rather than fall, and reversed the decision, I think it was 2 years later, in 2012. So I think, at least on the surface, this is a kind of cautionary, maybe precedent that critics have latched onto, saying that this doesn't work, essentially. And I think the second concern is international standards. The United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child recommends that countries set the age at 14 or above, and specifically told South Korea in 2019 to maintain the current threshold. Its reasoning, again, is that 12 to 13-year-olds are still developing maturity and abstract reasoning. So I think when we look at the peer countries, they also follow this kind of benchmark. I believe Germany sets the criminal responsibility at 14, Denmark, Sweden and Finland all set at 15. And in many states in the US, it's at about 14 years old. The average in the EU is, again, around 14 years old. So we're seeing 14, 15. So I think the government appears to be caught between these kind of competing pressures. After the Social Dialogue Committee recommended maintaining the current age, authorities reversed course and are now examining a kind of conditional lowering to 13 years old for the very serious crimes only, or serious offences only. But of course, the critics again will say well, then that's no compromise at all, since it means still applying a criminal record to 13-year-olds. So I think the debate still has some way to go, and we'll probably see a lot more over the next months, if not years.
I have to agree with you. The social commentary on the issue and the debate for sure will continue for now. All right, Raphael, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
Rory, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you, Zhang.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching, and see you again same time tomorrow.
He bursts into laughter upon unexpectedly discovering an incense burner on a street in Insadong.